Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another quick deck overview. This time, is it / Temur Creativity? As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving us a thumbs up on this video. So, Temur Creativity barely won the poll as of the making of this video. It was very close between it, Ban Humans, and Azorius Spirits. This is a combo deck that it sees some play in the Pioneer format as well as some play in the Explorer format, although the win cons that they run do vary a little bit differently. Much like the powerful Indomitable Creativity decks in the Modern format, this deck does use overwhelmingly powerful things that it hits in terms of creatures while not playing any other creatures in its deck, so no matter what you hit, it tends to be very powerful, whether you're playing this or the version that is playing the Torrential Gearhulks that we'll actually cover in a different video, because it really is a slightly different deck in what it's trying to execute. That's more of a value-based Magma Opus kind of deck, whereas this is more of a instant win combo that it turns into a grindy mid-range / control combo deck in the post-board games. Basically, you're trying to resolve Indomitable Creativity targeting two things to get Worldspine Wurm and Xenagos God of Revels into play. You get a 15/15 Trampler that gets haste and its power gets doubled, so you basically get a 30/30 hasting trampling creature whenever you resolve this spell, and whenever you do that, your opponent either has to have a removal spell, a ton of blockers, and then even if Worldspine Wurm dies, it leaves behind 3/5/5 worms, and it shuffles into your library, so you can do it all over again. And your opponent really has very few ways to actually interact with Xenagos, outside of random things like Otawaru and stuff, simply because it's almost never a creature in this deck. Beyond that, you try to use things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, Unexpected Windfall, or Big Score to leave tokens in play, primarily treasure tokens, to allow you to target things with Indomitable Creativity, and much like anything non-creature related, it's a lot harder to target artifacts in the format than it is creatures, so it's a little bit harder to interact with this combo, especially in game one. Although, some decks are starting to see main deck Abrades and stuff for an entirely other reason, mainly Gruul vehicles, or things like Kullagan's Command. Other than that, it is a little bit easier to resolve on a treasure token than it is creature-based removal heavy formats like Rakdos. Beyond that, you're just kind of an is-it good stuff control deck. You're using things like Fire Impulse and Spike Field Hazard, as well as Fire Prophecy and Abrade to keep yourself alive long enough to get where you need to go. You're using things like Impulse and various different things like Fable of the Mirror Breaker, the Big Score, Unexpected Windfall, etc. to kind of cycle through your deck, find the missing pieces. This version is running a Key to the City, which allows you to investigate and then flash back for 2 more clue tokens. Basically, it's kind of like Hard Evidence that used to be played in the Modern version. It's just a way to get more things in play. And then Negate to interact with your opponent's spells a little bit. Flip the Switch allows you to basically have a bad mana leak with a zombie attached to it that allows you to have another creature to target. Basically, without access to things like Dwarven Mine and the tokens that come with that, because you're not running a fetch land mana base, obviously, in the Pioneer format, you kind of have to get a little bit more creative with finding ways to put tokens into play. In the sideboard, you get a pretty good idea of what this deck is trying to do. Disdainful Stroke for any type of mono green shenanigans or control mirrors. Narset's Reversal primarily for opposing big spells like something out of Is It Phoenix like Temporal Trespass or Treasure Cruise, or something like Thought Distortion out of Lotus Field combo. Fry, this allows you to interact with a lot of annoying different things, primarily dealing with things like Abzan or Greasefang out of Abzan. Brother's End is an interesting new addition to the deck. Allows you to either destroy a bunch of artifacts or deal 3 damage to each creature or planeswalker. Nice sweeper to have access to in the post-board games. Mystical Disputes when you're fighting any type of control war. Shark Typhoon, once again, when you kind of need additional win cons against something like control. Interesting split on this. Obviously, Niv Mizzet and Coma are all 4 of these cards are uncounterable, which can be relevant in matchups where you expect your opponent to be gunning hard for your Indomitable Creativities. Notably, you can hardcast each one of these because of your treasure tokens. So these are primarily for control-based matchups where you're expecting it a lot harder to resolve your Indomitable Creativities. Also, they're very interesting win cons against the mid-range and control decks in the format, so you might consider switching out for things like Coma and such, but oftentimes Xenagos and Worldspine Wurm is your primary choice in a lot of matchups, whether it be against aggressive decks, as oftentimes they're not going to be able to survive a hit for 30, or against something like Rakdos, who any of their removal spells that can deal with something like a 15/15 for 11 mana, generally speaking, is sorcery speed, so they're just going to kind of get hit with a one-hit KO. Beyond that, there are other combos you can run. There's the Lotus God Sage of the Great Falls, I believe it is the combo that used to see play before people realized this combo was a thing in the format. That basically allows you to create an almost infinite number of 1/1 hasty flying tokens. The downside is that if Sage dies, your combo is kind of broken up, and they are a little bit awkward to cast. Xenagos, at least if it has to get cast, you only really have to spend a treasure token, so it's not that bad. And Worldspine Wurm, you can always shuffle it back into your library, either with Fiery Prophecy or discarding it to the big score and Unexpected Windfall. But it can be awkward to draw either one of your creatures. As far as, let's take a look at some of the other versions before I start talking about matchups. This version, seeing a lot of the same things, although some of the cards are a little bit different. Secrets of the City, you're seeing a few more of these copies. You're seeing a Bark Channel Pathway in this version to enable it to be able to cast. One other card I forgot to mention is Sekensen, which can also produce some tokens for you to target. Fires of Victory goes along with Fire Prophecy as other ways to interact with your opponent at instant speed. Can also happen to draw with it in the mid-game. Valakut Awakening is an interesting land splash spell split card that allows you to potentially put some cards back in your deck, draw some new cards, or it's just a tap land, which sometimes is relevant in a 23 or 24 land deck that's trying to hit at least up to 4 or 5 mana. Sweltering Suns is a sweeper. Big Score we've already kind of talked about is the preferred double treasure spell, though you can also run copies of Unexpected Windfall, which is the original effect. Shark Typhoon, we've already kind of talked about, is a nice split card of instant speed threat against control, while also being able to potentially win the game on its own if you just hard cast it into some of your other spells. So it does give you another angle of attack. Sideboard, Running Volley serves much the same purpose as Fry, primarily here for Spirits and for Greasefang. Ether Gusts against green-based decks. Disdainful Stroke against control and green. Negate for any type of control mirrors, along with Mystical Dispute to be able to resolve your spells. Second copy of Shark Typhoon, and a partridge in a pear tree. Hullbreaker Horror, obviously very good in the control mirrors, being able to bounce stuff and such. It being uncounterable is kind of relevant. And then Stormtide Leviathan, pretty good against any type of creature-based decks, basically shutting down most of their attack ability, except for a deck like Spirits. Finally, taking a look at yet another version of the deck. Here with Xenagos and obviously Worldspine Wurm as the win cons. This version is doing a little bit more of just digging instead of playing the counterspell version. So you still have things like Secrets of the City here. You still have a little bit of negate and impulse action. 4 copies of Fable the Mirror Breaker in this particular version. The other versions were all running 4, it looks like, as well. Now this version wasn't running any at all. So, even within the various different versions, you're seeing different things. But they're all trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to put treasure tokens into play. They're trying to target it with Indomitable Creativity, and they're trying to win the game. This version has to be running Indomitable Creativities here. Dig Through Time is a nice way of digging through your deck to try to find the combo piece, as without creativity you are just kind of this mopey control deck that kind of struggles a little bit. Sideboard, once again, you're seeing a lot of the same things. You're seeing red-based sweepers for the aggressive decks. You're seeing Fry or Running Volley for either Spirits or Greasefang. You're seeing Disdainful Strokes and Aether Gusts for the green-based decks. Negates for the control mirrors or decks heavy on non-creature spells such as mono green sometimes. And then you're seeing a myriad of threats that, against decks with a bunch of removal spells, or against decks where you're having to play more of a flash game, more like, the Torrential Gearhulk version would be much better in. Obviously, Coma and Hullbreaker Horror, both very good against the control decks if you can resolve them, or I should say get them into play and cast them, not resolve them, as obviously they can't be countered. As far as the deck's positioning in the meta, well, I have not seen very much in the way of gameplay for this outside of, I think I've seen Doomlike play it a little bit. but it really isn't a deck that's particularly popular. I've played a little bit of it in the Explorer format with the Sage and Lotus God version of the deck, mainly in best of one, just to get a feel for what the deck is capable of. It really feels that, ironically, this deck is very good into things like Greasefang. It's fairly reasonable into the aggressive decks, and just tends to struggle against the tempo and the control decks. You have just enough disruption against something like Lotus Field to be pretty reasonable, being able to combo relatively the same time they are with just enough disruption to keep them off balance. You have enough three damage based removal spells to make Greasefang's life completely miserable, and you can generally stay alive against their B and C plans long enough to get there. And then obviously against the aggressive decks, you just have a bunch of red based removal and kind of a combo win, very a la Is It Phoenix, leading to very good results. Rakdos is a bit weird of a weird matchup. Obviously the over the top combo they're not particularly well set up to deal with, but they do have a lot of disruption in the form of Thoughtseize and such, and they can put enough pressure on you to potentially make a mistake. That said, I do think Rakdos is a pretty reasonable matchup for the deck. Mono green, don't honestly know. Haven't really seen a lot of the matchup overall. Obviously, you have a lot of matchup for the early dorks. If you can keep them slowed enough off balance, you can potentially kill them with a combo. But obviously your treasure tokens get a little bit worse in the face of Karn. But there aren't too many artifacts that actually keep the creatures from entering the battlefield, as Grafdigger's Cage actually doesn't stop creativity, which is weird, but that's just kind of the way the templating is. And a lot of it just comes down to how consistently can you find your creativities for the win. You have a lot of dig, even your removal spells have a lot of bidding things with Fire Prophecy, Valakut Awakening, bidding them, big score allowing you to dig through cards, etc. So, deck overall very powerful. It's a little bit inconsistent against control, and obviously the Spirits decks is probably a complete nightmare. Green-White Angels could potentially outpace you in terms of being able to take the 30 hit, somehow dealing with it, and then whatever, because your red-based removal doesn't deal with a lot of their creatures particularly well. But that's a deck you don't see a ton of, and I would suspect that we are still pretty decent in that matchup, especially if things like Coma come down. Or, just hitting them with a 30-30 twice can often get the game done in that regard. Beyond that, blue-white control, fairly bad matchup, hence why you're seeing a lot of can't be countered threats, because you kind of have to pivot from a combo deck to just being able to resolve your big fat monsters they have problems dealing with, and sometimes Supreme Verdict just can't deal with it because, well, you're either bouncing their Supreme Verdict to their hand, you're making your Coma indestructible, etc. Although a card like Wandering Ember can be a little bit awkward, especially against Coma when it's attacking. But overall, this deck has its weaknesses, which is mainly the control decks, and Spirits obviously is probably a pretty nasty matchup, although you do have a lot of red-based removal for a lot of their creatures, so it might be a little bit more even than I'm giving it credit for. But overall, controls your bad matchups, have an okay Rakdos matchup, don't really know the mono green matchup, although I can certainly see you having the tools to beat it, and overall, that is Temur Creativity, mainly the combo version. We will do a separate video for the Is It Creativity decks with Torrential Gearhulk.